Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next lecture of our public program, Exploring the Intricacies of Toyen. Today we have the immense pleasure and honor to welcome amongst us Dr. Annabelle Görgen-Lammers. She is one of the experts of surrealism and also one of the leading figures of our current Toyen exhibition. So welcome, Annabelle. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very much looking forward to your lecture. And afterwards, I would like to remind everybody that we will also hold a short Q&A session. So if you are interested in details, don't leave us too soon because there is more to come.
Yes, dear Jitka, thank you very much for the introduction. And first of all, please pardon me that I'm not speaking Czech, but English, and this even not very well. I hope I can make myself understood nevertheless, and allow me to start with expressing my gratitude towards my fellow curators, Annie Lebrun in Paris, and Anna Pravdova, my great colleague in National Gallery Prague, for our mutual project and inspiring collaboration on the exhibition. And let me also thank my German assistants, Alexandra Pietroch, Yves Tak, and Greta Molkewerum, who allowed me now for 2 hours to get out of all our very intense preparations for our version of the exhibition to be able to speak here with you. That's a big pleasure and a big honor. Dear Jitka, thank you so much, last not least, for your invitation and Alena's invitation. I'm honored, and nevertheless, I have to say that as a German art historian, being invited to talk about Toyen in Prague is something like, as we say, carrying owls to Athens, because certainly the most knowledgeable and renowned experts are there in your country and in France. And next to my mentioned co-curators, it's certainly Lenka Bujovska and Karel Schritt. So actually, I see myself rather as an ambassador on behalf of Toyen in Germany, and especially not as an expert. But the attitude linked with my long fascination for the work of Toyen has also been my impetus to turn to Annie Lebrun, the poet and friend of the artist, having worked with Toyen and having an immense knowledge and souvenir of her, with my vision to make an exhibition on her, on Toyen's art. I think it's about 5 or 6 years ago, and then be part of this initiating this collaboration, this first collaboration of our three institutions in Prague, Paris, and Hamburg. And you might understand that for me, next to my art historical and personal admiration for the artist, I feel a high responsibility to contribute to make her and her work known better also in my country, Germany, which has, as we all know, caused in history so horrible circumstances of Toyen's life and work, and under whose cruelty in the time of occupation of Nazi Germany she had suffered and to which she had reacted so strongly. So it's a big honor to be here. Thank you. And for the choice of works for this first solo exhibition of Toyen in Germany. And with my view somehow from the outside, what interested me and what I would like to speak now is that it seems at first glance that Toyen used many different pictorial concepts, which changed in different phases of her works. However, if you look closer, I think exactly this seemingly diversity testifies also a kind of sense of rebellion. Rebellion, which means here with Toyen, to my mind, an immense freedom and at the same time an immense consequence in developing her topics, which are recurring characteristics which we can find when tracing the processes out of which the pictorial concepts merged. So following on the early 1930s and trying to recall some aspects of the historical, artistic, and personal contexts of encounters between theories, personalities, and works of other international surrealists might help us to think about Toyen's unique way of finding and approaching specters, even of approaching them in a way as André Breton has described it in 1952. Toyen forged her very own way of the art of changing apparitions. So let me start with a very early drawing that caught my attention in a little sketchbook. Step by step, two people climb the narrow spiral staircase in the Julie column of the Place de la Bastille. They must have emerged through a tiny dark entrance, and there are still many steps ahead of them before they pass by the subterranean grave of the Revolutionary Guards, and they reach the golden genius of liberty on the very top. The plain, pattern-like figures of the woman and the man with their backs turned to us in the narrow interior of the monument stand in stark contrast to those wearing colorful costumes on the broad Place de la Bastille. They seem to be prepared for spectacular stage performances. Above this, see the red Phrygian soft conical cap here from antiquity, which came to be as a symbol of revolutionary France and which has first been documented in May 1790. And as you know, till this day, the national allegory of France, Marianne, is shown wearing this red Phrygian cap. So here the Phrygian cap nearly reaches as far as the genius of liberty. And under this sign of freedom, this genius, ghosts of the great past take shape in the imagination of those ascending. And those ghosts, they seem to be much more present than the colorless Paris tourists themselves in the inside of the monument, Jindřich Štýrský and Marina Čerminová, who climbed the monument to the French Revolution on January 29th in 1925. Actually, since the 16th January, they have been staying in Paris. Here's a photo of Toyen in Paris in 27. As suggested by the preceding pages in Toyen's bound sketchbook, we can think that this emergence of apparitions seems to have been inspired in part by images and information that Toyen had previously seen in the Musée Carnavalet, which is dedicated to the history of Paris. We even see that she noted the mentioned year of 1790. And you can detect motives like the drama, which she's developing in this sketchbook, and which she will literally be using later in her paintings, like in the Three Kings. So the sketches by the 23-year-old artist already hint to my mind at a fundamental concern of her art. The formal and media spectrum of Toyen's 60-year oeuvre might seem incoherent at first glance, but in fact, to my mind, recurring themes are just as central to her work as the ongoing and manifold search for new possibilities of the poetic image itself. So she develops different concepts of presentation and representation in order to uncompromisingly exhaust the supposed limits of artistic freedom in her field. So the question might be, where is a poetic image located between presentation, between its own presence and representation, that is the depiction of an idea, whether it is stimulated by an internal image or by an image from other sources, external sources. Within this search between presentation, presence, and representation also lies a question of how a picture can approximate the ultimate, the existential secret, absence, nothingness. So I can summarize here only briefly. Concerning the idea of presentation, around 25, Toyen introduced in her works as if on stage, and she presented spectacles that were prepared for an audience. Her art was already then not about reality, but about making artificial and artistic exhibiting present. And so she ostentatiously presents also things that seem to be hidden, but entice with the possibility of their unveiling, as seen in the transparent skirts in her Three Dancing Girls, for example. That's already here. The artist is thinking about the inverse of what she's doing. The partial open curtain, like the circus curtain, plays a major role in many drawings, sketches, and all paintings. In also paintings. By inserting representative spectators or the empty seats, she makes present both the anticipation and the perception of what is to be shown. Her visual conception from 27 onwards is with artificialism about the process of presenting, perceiving, and remembering. So how can the material presence of an image realize, record, and re-trigger these processes? As with the work of an alchemist, variable and seemingly aging folded structures emerge. She attacks the wrinkles, as Philippe Soupault specified in 27. Thus, the former demonstration of seen and imagined spectacles, like in the circus, give way to presenting the originality of material and the material as origin. So Toyen focalizes the material and poetic presence of the painting. To this interest fields come in her working procedures of what I call treasure hunt. Toyen elaborates simultaneously in drawings and early collages interests in finding and taking details of images as if they were found objects. On those bases and the one of her experiences with presenting and staging presence, Toyen develops then her own form of surrealism from 29 onwards, and probably finished this conception already in 32. So from the presented recollections of memories of her artificialist period, echoes of form and space seem to emerge from the surface of the picture as if from a metaphoric primordial ground. Sections of the picture surface which had spread in all directions now condense as if parts of the canvas were being pushed together. Folds emerge and take the stage. They are initially reminiscent of the early circus curtains, yet they emancipate themselves from this reference. Toyen utilizes her experience both with emphasizing the presence of matter and with the stage-like positioning of shapes in space in order to create the illusion of a depths and zones of the image, while at the same time partially and deliberately breaking again this illusion of depths. So whereas the shapes initially developed organically through the painting process, they now appear to be more and more projected into the painting, emerging from the remembrance of elements perceived outside of the painting process of real and mental found objects. Thus, after the question of presentation and of presence, now issues of representation take more importance. The presenting of perceptions and ideas, whether from the inner or outer world, via representatives. So around 33, 34, Toyen entered an exciting phase in which the structures, she structures the picture surface in zones of flat or folded grounds and form, which opens up to a deeper speciality in itself. And she shows the play between form and ground and speciality inside this as an oscillating phenomenon. So structures arise from folds and develop like rocks, appearing more and more dried up and broken. So basically, the folds become fissures, and the deep fissures appear in both ground and in the form. So they suggest processes of decay and transition and become the protagonists of the pictures. In a strange way, now landscape characteristics and objectness is combined here. Women's bodies appear, mostly torsos, that are radically concerned with the process of emptying body form itself. In Magnet Woman, Toyen presents a seemingly voluminous body as nothing more than an object that is being consumed, perhaps by itself, from within. Thus, this is further emphasized by the body's juxtaposition with a vital, meandering, and growing linear form. So next to the well-known link we have for this composition with Stirsky's Squid Man, Toyen must have been familiar also with Brassai's monumental photograph of a potato consuming itself in the process of germination. This photo, as we all know, accompanied Breton's programmatic text, Beauty Will Be Convulsive, in May 34 edition of Minotaur. Likewise, Toyen may have also been inspired by Stirsky's photos of roos that he had discovered, and other root photos reproduced in Minotaur in that time. But in her painterly process, Toyen can intensify the subject by contrasting the sensual plastic modeling of her red body-like shape with the deep blackness of its interior, visible through the gaping physis here. So with this, violence and vulnerability, presence and emptiness, all are conveyed at various sensual levels within this representative form. The forming, or rather emptying, directly and painfully speaks to the physical sensation of the viewer. Around 34, Toyen's formations become oscillating objects in oscillating grounds. She plays with the increasingly ambiguous division between form and ground, and ultimately with the fragility of their broken relationship to one another. The result confuses the spectator's perception in several ways. In the series Voice of the Forest, for example, the ruffled plumage of the owl-like formation invites us to stroke it with our hands, yet the voluminous form appears visually suspicious. The dark black of its inner center appears to be an infinite opening that threatens to consume the figure itself and everything approaching it. This emphasis on the tactile seduced volume conceals what lies below, and via this concealing, it makes it uncanny. In the yellow spectre and the pink spectre, the artist takes this ambivalent interplay between form and ground even one step further, I think. The seductive form, which is partially voluminous and at the same time split open with fissures into the void, apparently casts a shadow on the equally brittle ground. The painterly concept of the shadow, which normally condenses space, still purports to be able to separate the body from the corresponding ground. It purports as if it were still inside an illusionary coherent pictorial space. But the body is simultaneously opening itself in those fissures into a much deeper space, into nothingness itself. Here, the spectator's special visual imagination and his acceptance of a coherent pictorial space ultimately fails. Literally, the swaying trapeze turns the stage over the fissures as a place for the emergence of the spectre. In the early 1930s, Toyen thought to imagine and visually capture apparent paradoxes via the training of appearances, as Breton had put it later. How can the presentation, thus the making present of a concealment, refer to what is concealed? How can objectness refer to a subject? And how can an image suggest what is absent with what it shows? How can it evoke nothingness with its use of form and space? After 1936, through more realistic depictions, Toyen intensified the impression of illusionistic speciality, and her forms become more concrete, as we know. So in The Message of the Forest is a transitional picture based on the series of The Voice of the Forest, but here a realistic detail is added to the bird via the claw. Reminiscent of Lautréamont's dictum upon which the concept of convulsive beauty is based, Mervyn is as beautiful as the retraceability of a bird of prey's claws. With this painting, a new conception of image emerges in Toyen's work as the development of her oeuvre enters 37. Veristically represented forms increasingly detach themselves from the landscape that surrounds them, which soon becomes desert-like. This development towards a more illusionistic conception of form and ground has been somewhat suggested as early as 1934 or 35, when Toyen defined some of her object ideas through illusionistically painted details, such as pieces of cloths or barbed wire, which appear apparently like in Menhir, for example, veil something which is underneath them, or barbed wire which wraps around a diffuse zone of color like in Prometheus. So Toyen stages the hidden as intangible. Instead of the emptied body itself, Toyen here increasingly uses the motive of hollow and freestanding garments tailored for this body. And she further develops this in 37, for example, in Abandoned Burrow or Sleeping. With this choice, with the burrow also might have been influenced in part by the interest of the French surrealist J.S. Cossets. She depicts a stage objectiveness that questions itself and combines presence with absence. With her use of plain, pattern-like female figures viewed from behind, as we say in German, Rückenfigur, or rigidly shaped representatives of this female figure, as in Sleeping or in Pebbles of the Evening, Toyen besides seems to refer to the tradition of the German Romanticism, like Caspar David Friedrich's self-absorbed protagonists who are confronted with the secrets of the universe. They too pull the viewer into the expanse of space, and by staging a dialogue with nature, purportedly support the viewer's experience of nature as well as their metaphysical experience of the work. However, Toyen's representatives allow that they show that they no longer have a core to be absorbed to. They are hollow, relicts of a past experience, frozen in the desert landscape, and can only signify the memory of life, the memory of experiencing physicality, desire, nature, or spectacle. So if we have a look at Toyen's way, coming from curtains, folds, fizzes, veils, I would like to think about the question of the object. The historical, personal, and conceptual context and inspiration for Toyen's development from landscape to the ambiguous object for her very own apparitions was provided in part by her Czech comrades in arms, particularly Styrsky and Nesvel, certainly, and the work of and debates of the surrealist artists in Paris, I think, especially their debates about the importance of the object. Those debates, I think, also may have fortified her developmental path in this time. So the surrealist theories of the object, which, as Nesvel emphasized, could be treated in painting, were from the start linked with a dialectical reconciliation of perception with imagination, with an inner model. Indeed, the French surrealists, in the many statements issued during the period of generally increasing realism in the 1930s, emphasized also the revolutionary, liberating effect of their useless objects in the face of the brutal realities, as they said, that were surrounding them. And they did even more so intensely after their final break with the French Communist Party in 1935. So attempts to define the surrealist object quickly became manifold and complex, and the focus shifted around 29, when the relationship between surrealism and automatism changed. And the more passive approach gave way to a more active understanding of production due to the influence of Salvador Dali, who joined the group in 1929. Certainly it was not only Salvador Dali, but he gave some important impulses. Toyen had already returned to Prague when Dali arrived in Paris in April 29, so she was not able to see his first solo exhibition at the end of November 29 in Paris, but the Czech avant-garde certainly had access to the numerous illustrations of his works and text later in the French art magazines. And actually the Czech surrealists seem to have been acquainted with Dali's works and object theories well before they heard Breton's speeches on the situation of the object in Prague in March 35. So in 1931, Dali called for more intense attention to surrealist objects, and Breton supported this with his text, L'Objet Fantôme. With this text, Breton is introducing this phantom concept, which he already had introduced in the surrealist discussion as early as 29 with Nadia. So Breton here emphasized that fear gives rise to poetic, artistic constructions which seem to elude the natural conditions of existence that govern all other objects. This is what Breton writes. In 1932, Dali had proposed, probably referring back to Man Ray's Enigma of Isidore Ducasse, that the surrealist object originated in the unsettling effect of wrappings. He calls it wrappings, which tempted the spectator to touch but prevented the object from being identified. He also presented Max Ernst's painting Pietà, or Revolution by Night from 23, as a prelude to the surrealist object. He writes in 32, the early surrealist experimenters found themselves plunged into the subterranean passages of Revolution by Night, the passages where the mysteries of New York must have been enacted. He's referring to a popular crime series with these mysteries of New York, cinema, a movie which he loved. Toyen saw this work he is referring to, next to the mysteries of New York, this work by Max Ernst, in the exhibition Poesie in 1932, in October, in the same year as Dali wrote about this work, what I just quoted. So besides in Poesie, which is a topic in itself, certainly, she could also see paintings by Yves Tanguy, the Tail Mountain pictures coming from the collection from André Breton. And in these works, Tanguy, referring to the plateau-like rock formations of the North African mountains, creates special density and depth from geological folds. And as described above, exactly, Toyen herself had simultaneously examined similar space compressing folds and the creation of tension between surface and space. She did so in works such as Northern Landscape, which you see here, and which was also presented in Poesie 32, alongside Tanguy's works. And this must have interested her in the artist Tanguy, with whom from 1935 on, she will be linked with a very special friendship, as Radovan Ivčík had put it. But Tanguy would be another topic for a talk, so I will not continue on Tanguy, but on how Nesval opened this exhibition Poesie 32 and hold a speech that heavily relied on Dali's theories, which I just quoted. In his further concretizations of his object theories, Dali emphasized the suggestive power of the concealed with increasing clarity. And in May 34, he pointed to Man Ray's photos of a figure wrapped in wrinkled clothes for illustration. A phantom materializes, he writes, through the delusion of volume. The covering creates ambiguity. with regard to the volume and makes it suspicious, virtual, and frightening. It personifies a metaphysical fear. So he distinguishes here in his text in May 34, phantoms from specters via the wordplay spectre, spectrum. And he writes a differentiation in this phantom theory, which seems astonishingly close to his depicting of a male figure in a painting he paints shortly after that in 35, which is this painting, which is also referring in its title to these quoted Mysterious of New York, the cinema movie he was referring to in the other quote. So he writes here, the figure is composed of both covered phantom-like elements and clear elements of a spectre. The tight trousers make its lower abandon appear spectrally detachable, in contrast to the phantom manner of the wrinkled clothes covering the upper body. So these 1934 formulated phantom theories must have been familiar to the Czech surrealists in this year in which Nezval, who had started work on the founding manifesto of the Czech Surrealist foundation of the group in March 34, with the beginning of the line, a spectre is haunting revolutionary Europe, a spectre of fascism, in allusion to the opening of the Communist Party manifesto by Marx and Engels, and Nezval, who was involved in this time in choosing the title Spectre for the two paintings by Toyen. So after this view to the object and phantom theory of the French surrealists, allow me here brief aspects of the history of their meeting before I come back to this idea of the object. After the founding of the surrealist group in Czechoslovakia in March 34, in August, there was the prospect of a first surrealist exhibition in Prague, which was initially planned as a collaborative showing of international artists with also Dali. Stirsky had hoped that, quotation, André Breton will come to Prague in autumn. A large exhibition of international surrealist painting is being organized, and Salvador Dali will perhaps be present to open the exhibition. However, in the end, neither this international exhibition nor Nezval's hope to bring Breton to Czechoslovakia as soon as the autumn or winter 34 could be realized for financial reasons. Nevertheless, Nezval, who had been in correspondence with Breton since June 34 very intensely, was able to complete together with Honzel, as we know, the first Czech translation of Breton's Communicating Vessels, for which Toyen designed the book cover as a cyclographic collage, which seems to have been inspired a bit by Max Ernst's collage novel The 100 Headless Women, which has also been reproduced earlier in Czech art journals. In December 34, Breton wrote to Nezval that he found her cover extremely inspiring, and towards the end of the year, Nezval once again assured Breton that here all our friends' eyes are on you. The first exhibition of the Czechoslovak surrealist, as you know best, took place in the Marnes Gallery from mid-January to mid-February 35, featuring works by Stirsky, Markowski, and Toyen. And Toyen, she contributed, as far as we know, 24 paintings, all of which she had made in the previous year. Nezval wrote with primary reference to Dali's theories in their 35 catalog. Quotation, one cannot explain the theory of surrealist painting without explaining the theories of objects. Building on this, he defines the categories of illusion and hallucination and differentiates between phantom illusions, hallucinatory spectre objects, and hallucinatory phantom objects, such as the example Voice of the Forest group. The arrival of Jacqueline Breton, together with Paul Éluard, though highly anticipated, Nezval wrote, "We are expecting you with fanatical excitement," did, however, unfortunately not come to life until the 27th of March 35, when the exhibition had already ended. So after visiting the artist's studios on March 29, Breton then presented the lecture created especially for this occasion, the surrealist situation of the object, the situation of the surrealist object. And he opened his talk in the overcrowded Manes gallery, as he writes, with praise for the Czech surrealists, and continued with a discussion of the transformation that surrealism had undergone with the aid of 30 slides depicting works by Dali, Ernst, Tanguy, Man Ray, and others. He talked about the role both of the conscious and the unconscious in the creative process, and emphasized that surrealism's goal of liberating the spirit also requires the liberation of the individual, thus the proletarian revolution. The day after his lecture, Breton wrote to Dali in Cadaqués, I quote, considerable success here. 700 people yesterday at the Surrealist Art and Poetry Conference with lectures and screenings. Surrealism finds itself in a fantastic position here, totally exceptional, triumphant reception. And Éluard added a greeting with the confirmation, yes, everything's excellent here. The letters Éluard wrote in these days during his stay in Prague to Toyen, which I think are presented for the first time in this exhibition or in this catalog, provide evidence that he was also personally deeply impressed by the painter. To Gala in Paris, at the same time he wrote, the strip is a revelation. There are some very good people here, especially Inés Valentine, two painters, Snící and Toyen, a very remarkable woman, make wonderful pictures and collages, photos in the newspapers, articles in the communist newspapers, interviews. I think Prague will be the gateway to Moscow for us. Indeed, this visit marked the beginning of the internationalization of surrealism, the first bilingual issue of the Bulletin International du Surréalisme, officially published on the April 9th, but in reality only April 20th, was realized together with the Czech surrealists, which solidified the significant personal and artistic exchange acquired through the many joint activities of the group. We see some photos of their visit in Karlovy Vary. Later, the French surrealists often referred back to these encounters when historizing the internationalization of the movement, as for example in the Dictionnaire abrégé of 38, which was accompanying this big Exhibition Internationale du Surréalisme in 38 in the Gallery Wildenstein. And here you see this reference was also done visually, as with the reprinting of a photo, which probably was taken by Stilsky, who is not seen on this photo anymore, but here. With quoting these moments of a visit to the magical capital of old Europe, Prague, which was marked by high mutual esteem and sympathy. And this remained a very bright moment in Breton's memory. And he wrote to Nashville, "The memory of this city and of you is among the most beautiful ones in my life." And in 1936, he still made plans to spend several years in Prague. On the day of the French group's departure, we know Toyen gifted Éluard the second version of Voice of the Forest and Breton Prometheus. From this point on, these both paintings would be her two most shown paintings, and she would be present at all international exhibitions of surrealism with them. It was not until their trip to Paris on June 14th, 1935, which coincided with Nashville's planned participation in the International Writers' Congress in Defense of Culture, that Toyen, Stilsky, and Nashville met many of the French surrealists for the first time personally. They visited numerous studios, saw Breton and Éluard especially frequently, and they got personally known also Benjamin Perret and, as I already said, Yves Tanguy for the first time. So let me just focus one of the many studio visits they did. Toyen visited Dali's studio with Eloire in Nesval on June 24th, 35, shortly after she had to bring Stirsky to hospital for an embolism. It is documented in Nesval's book, Ulysse guide le coeur, which he wrote as a book of friendship after this visit. And in the Czech version, he even reproduced the work that Toyen saw and intensely studied the painting The Soulless Mystery of New York in 1935 in Dali's studio, and in which Dali seemed so astonishingly close, depicting this figure as he had developed his phantom theory. And to which Toyen, as shown, would have been familiar, possibly via Nesval. A reproduction of this poster draft for a movie based on this aforementioned crime series had been in Stirsky's Prague studio before, and it was later used, and it had been there, to be used in the magazine Surrealismus. See it here. Nesval describes this encounter Toyen has with this painting. I quote, "I saw Toyen avert her eyes from the painting, confessing to me that she could not look at it any longer, for it reminded her of the moment when Stirsky, right before the climax of his embolism, had stood up and for some inexplicable reason looked at his watch, his head tilted." In addition to the painted figuration's striking resemblance to Stirsky's behavior, as described by Nesval, Toyen's reaction to the painting was almost most probably caused by the mixture of memories of her friend's home studio, perhaps, where she had seen this reproduction of this painting, by her current experience of helplessness in the face of Stirsky's existentially threatening illness, and perhaps even by the metaphysical fear, as Breton had put it, made present in Dali's phantom spectre. An understanding of this aspect of his work for which she herself would have been open due to her own so fundamental investigations into the idea of object and phantom, of presence and absence. This combination of sensations, experiences, and imaginations likely contributed to the immense impression Dali's painting made on her, which Nesval writes in his book and describes as, I quote, "If ever I saw absolute hopelessness, sheer despair in the face of Toyen, who always refrained from pessimism, it was due to this irrational circumstance." Looking back at the Message of the Forest in 1938, Nesval recognized the tremendous perspective that Toyen had opened up with Voice of the Forest. I quote, "On the threshold of the symbolic world that she had overcome, that what was hitherto been considered incompatible, a subjective painting style and an objective idea that function as a symbol, is uniquely disposed to create through its misalliance a concrete, irrational figment of the imagination par excellence, which is to say the spectre." Quote, and indeed, with Toyen, there is a parallel fascination for the visualization of the hidden through the creation of phantom-like forms, and thus ambivalent images. And let me take an image Dali reproduced in 1935, a detail of Hans Holbein's The Ambassadors, in his essay, Aerodynamic Apparitions of Being Objects, to explain what I mean with Toyen's approach. In this image, the anamorphotically distorted representation of a skull refers here not only to the memento mori, but also to the anamorphotic mode of vision itself, a mode of vision which is transformative. In her works, Toyen is investigating, to my mind, a similar way of seeing, a way of seeing that addresses not only visual, but also tactile functions, psychological and spiritual functions. This transformative mode of vision is the basis of Toyen's recognizing analogies, through which, presuming a fundamental unity of the universe, the boundaries of reality which humans have drawn those boundaries can be challenged by this view on analogies. Toyen thus provokes a kind of double perception, a double vision of coexisting realities, whereby the spectator experiences an intense moment of the present, because in analogous thinking, as in the concept of the phantom, there is an active oscillating capacity, which is capable to mobilize, on the one hand, the desire for corporality, while awakening the premonition of mortality. So wherever we are seduced to desire, and whenever we especially sense the vitality of the present, our very liveliness anticipates our mortality. The extreme evokes the ghost of its opposite. When reality hides behind the first like a ghost that we know exists, but we have trouble seeing simultaneously with the other reality. So by the mobilization of desire and the thinking in analogies, both these aspects, the mobilization of desire and the thinking in analogies, these are central aspects of Toyen's work and sources of her subversive power. So like with Tanguy, which would be another topic, in Toyen's later work during the years of war, especially her drawings, we also see that life, which she had previously staged as a metamorphotic, appears to have come to a standstill. This development also undermines this desirous, imaginative, transformative looking that Toyen had previously in the 30s evoked. With the images she creates during the occupation, the power of perception itself is attacked, parallel to the way it was under attack by the occupying forces. As if by a premonition, Toyen painted in 1937 already, Object Phantom. And to this, Carl Teige commented in 1945, I quote, "It is no coincidence that one of the paintings got the name Object Phantom. After all these images were actually image objects, mirrors of fantastic objects." I think in this, I want to show this. In this mirror of the object phantom, Toyen seems to freeze the gaze, which was before, as I described, a transformative. Now it's freezed and it is inverted. The emptiness of the phantom image and the emptiness of the phantom image's deep black pupil stares back at the viewer. Toyen sets traps for the act of perception and the premise of identity. She did so in the context of reflections of the object and the phantom and the spectre, also in international surrealism, but she did in a unique way, opening up worlds in which solid forms are made unstable and assuming an oscillating relation of form and ground, whereby the permanent process of change is made visible, which also provokes a transformative mode of vision. This is what I think is extremely special with Toyen in the 30s. She is developing in the later 1930s an illusionistic representative approach with which she can seduce naively understood realism and lay traps for it. And she continues the surrealist approach to illusion also after the war, and indeed she titled her last painting Trap of Reality. As early as 1935, Tiger, to my mind, rightly stated, I quote, Toyen serving up reality in the most latent style and therefore trusting so profoundly in the discretion of the traps in which for her the entire alchemical truth of reality is to be found. So with her investigations of presentation, of representation, of presence and of absence, Toyen interrogated the act of creating images itself in a very unique way. Rather than developing just a new internally coherent pictorial means and rules, she also questioned them and deliberately and visually broke them again and again once she had developed a new step. So if you have again the voice of the forest group, the shock that the painting, which is referring to this group, but which is so different, the painting horror, the shock which is making the horror and which is making this painting so uncanny to my mind, here is not only that this form, which we know, seemingly injured the volume of the phantom object, and it opens up the views into a deep void. But I think the shock also stems from the fact that there is a sharp horizontal edge separating the cracked ground from the blue zone in the upper area. Because this can lead us to interpret the ground, which was before this primordial ground out of which the figures emerged and also the specters emerged. This can bring us to the understanding that this previously perceived ambiguous, brittle, amorphous, infinite primeval ground matter from which the phantoms emerge again opens up another space. With her ever innovative training of appearances, Toyen provokes here another double vision, because she seduces the spectator to imagine a place beyond the formerly evoked nothingness, this ground. And the hands which cling there show that the beyond this fence is not a very good place, perhaps. So in 1937, the fissures in form and ground, which I had described before, and in the relationship between form and ground, they gave way to a spectacular, convulsive, twitching fissure again. It's a fissure now within the existing conception of the image itself, with the space behind the image, which she is opening here. Toyen is opening up another new image concept. And this new image concept, 37, is also not set as an absolute by the artist who experienced various political and social models in her life herself. Also here she's not stopping, rather her works show different pictorial modes and make clear that those as such can exist at the same time and even require and mutually affect each other, just as reality demands representation here, and just as presence also includes absence. So Toyen creates new, free, artistic space for herself. And with her revolutionary way of making images, and literally saying she is taking another step up this narrow spiral staircase towards this golden genius of liberty. Under this Phrygian cap, and probably linked with the exhibition of Eros at Cordier Gallery in 1995 to 1960, André Breton dedicated Toyen a little note on the back of an invitation to another exhibition. And under this woman's hat with the Phrygian cap, he places a dedication saying, to Toyen, humbly tender André. And indeed, might be this also meant what I think she indeed was, revolutionary. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Annabelle, for your wonderful talk. I found it downright enlightening. I'm so sorry you can't see me because for some reason I cannot be revealed, but you know, it's very surrealist. So you have this talking geometrical shape. Once again, thank you so very much for the talk. And since this is the last lecture of our series, I think it would be also interesting to shed some light onto the future of the project. And in the very, oh, here I am. In the very intro to your lecture, you also mentioned something that I found personally very intriguing, and that is your position of a German scholar actually looking from the outside into the era of Toyen that took place mostly in Czechoslovakia and then of course in France. So could you perhaps talk a little bit about the German reception and even just the knowledge of Toyen's work?
Yes, thank you, Jitka. Yes, I can. I mean, it is a fact that unfortunately there has never been a solo exhibition of Toyen in Germany, as there's never been a solo exhibition of Toyen in Paris, strangely enough. But in the whole of Germany, she's not really known, even to art experts, I have to admit. And I think we really have to change this, and we will change this with the exhibition. She has been part of group exhibitions. In fact, there were some in recent history, women artists in Frankfurt, where she was represented with a small amount of paintings, but not with the whole totality of her work, certainly. And also in Hanover, there had been an exhibition on Czech surrealism, where she figured among many others. And what I found out, this was new for me too, that evidently she knew Hamburg, my town. She never has been there, but I'm trying to show you, I don't know if you see it.
Oh, we can see it, yes.
Yes, an image, which shall also be an invitation for you and everybody to my town. This image is quite old. It is from 1954, but it is a postcard which was posted to Toyen by nobody else than Elisa Breton, so the third wife by André Breton, and an important friend of Toyen's. And she had sent it to her on the 27th of August, 1954. Sorry, I'm trying to show you the whole image. And it's showing part of the harbor and stamped in Hamburg Center, where Elisa evidently stayed in summer 54 without André before she probably went on to Denmark. And Elisa writes to Toyen, I may quote it perhaps because it's so nice. Dear Toyen, I wish you knew how much I miss you and all the beauty that I see. And I have seen so much beautiful things here. The holidays are magnificent, surrounded of feelings and invited in the sense of the biggest hospitality. The little fisher boats which speed in the nights like the moths. I love harbors. Toyen, this life of come and go. If only you could have accompanied me in my explorations. I will perhaps go on to the islands of Denmark. It's already very north here in Hamburg, with everything which there is beautiful and mysterious in this north. In the garden of my hotel, there are crows croaking like all doors. So she kept this postcard evidently, so she had an idea of this town. What is also something new, which we didn't knew before, 15 years later, she was invited to a group exhibition here at the Hamburger Kunstverein, which is kind of next to our museum and which is historically the precursor of the Hamburger Kunsthalle, and then existing, being rather the place for contemporary artists and exhibitions. And the director, Dr. Hans Platte, visited Toyen in January 1969 in her studio. Then she lived already in Rue Fontaine. And According to a letter he wrote her on 29th of January, 69, he visited her during a trip to Paris, and with which he was preparing an exhibition called Surrealism from 24 to the present, the then present 69. And that was running very successfully in April and May 1969 at the Kunstverein Hamburg. And he thanks her in his letter for the kind reception and sends loan sheets for 2 of her works, which were in her possession in this time, which was Mythe de la Lumière from 46 and Minuit, Heure Plaçonnée. So those 2 paintings were in her possession 69, and she gave them as loans to next to our museum. So those were the only works present in the 60s in a German exhibition, as far as we know. There has been the Kunstmuseum in Bochum acquiring a work, 2 works, a painting and drawing in the 70s, but otherwise there is no work represented in any collection in Germany. So this is really these only occurrences of her works in exhibitions and in collections, which is very, very rare. So what might be also interesting to know, I read a little bit the correspondence between the director Platte and Toyen, and it is interesting. She was certainly invited to the opening. She could not come in 69. Unfortunately, I would have loved to know what she thought about our collection, because she evidently appreciated the German Romanticism and also knew Philipp Otto Runge, not only Caspar David Friedrich. And when Platte visited her, she offered him also to lend works by Stirsky, because he had noted that he might also ask L'Homme et la Femme from 34 from Stirsky, which she had in her possession. And evidently she proposed him to integrate Stirsky. But finally, the curator decided not to integrate Stirsky and to focus only on those 2 paintings by Toyen, even though he had seen more paintings by her in private collections in France. He had also seen and noted Au Château Lacoste and also La Fête de la Soie and also Au Visage Bleu. But he erased this from the list, probably also for financial reasons, which is always a reason for us. So he concentrated on the works she had recommended him to give him from her, directly from her possession, and those were the only ones also reproduced in the catalog, only black and white. So now those both works will return to Hamburg once the exhibition is finished in Prague and then starts in Hamburg. And also the works I mentioned, which Platte also wanted to show, they will also come. And we will combine those, this huge view, first view on her work in Germany, with very, very few looks to what I just alluded to the surrounding images which she might have known, the artist with whom she had contact. So Stirsky certainly, Heisler certainly, but also the Dali work I show, the Mystery of Surrealist, Mystery of 35, or works by Tanguy, or works by Man Ray, or works by Paul Klee, which she saw in the magazine Red, or also Max Ernst. So because our public does not know Toyen yet, we try to introduce her also as with the links to the artist our public knows. So it might be easier for the public who has the first encounter with this fantastic work to understand also the big impact she had, and the influences she saw, and also the influences she gave.
Thank you so much. You even managed to guess my next question. So I won't ask you how this somewhat limited reception influenced your own project, because, well, you just told us. But I can imagine that actually breaking new ground and kind of like adding a new artist into already well-established canon of modern art is never easy. Even though I suspect for an art historian, it's also supremely exciting work. So Annabelle, thank you once more so much for taking some time off your very busy schedule. I'm sure right now it's kind of insane to talk to us. We appreciate it very much. We should also invite, because as I said, this is the last lecture, so we should also invite our public to your museum. First of all, you did an excellent job with the postcard. I've never been to Hamburg. I must come. It sounds wonderful. And also it could be very interesting to actually see one of our own artists to be conceptualized from the outside, because that's actually how one learns a lot about one's own identity. So thank you so much, Annabelle. Good luck, fingers crossed, and I hope we all see each other in Hamburg.
Yes, feel very heartily invited, and thank you so much, Jitka, and all your colleagues. Thank you, Alena, and I hope to see you back again here. Thank you.